everyone, I'm Georgia and this is The Sound of Georgia. So the topic of today's video could be seen as kind of controversial and delicate. So I'm going to do my best to do this properly, but it could fail spectacularly. Today we're going to be talking about my two favourite things in the world, Sound of Music and Hamilton, and some of the implications that being a fangirl of these shows can come with, particularly when it comes to fanfiction. So I've mentioned it before on here, but in addition to my YouTube channel, I also write fanfiction. Perfect way to put my Bachelor of Writing degree that took me 3 years to get into use. Well, even going in I didn't want to write anything other than fanfic. But as you can guess, Hamilton and Sound of Music being the subjects for my fanfiction raises a bit of a question. These people aren't just characters. These people really existed, which can bring up the issue of shipping real people. For those of you who don't know what shipping means, it's basically when you pair two characters in a usually romantic relationship. So to you, you love the idea of these characters being a couple, and in your mind they are. And ships can be with just about anyone. They can be the couples you actually see in the story, so canon, or they can be characters that are miles apart in the world of the story. There really are no rules. Now I have read a couple of fanfics here and there that are actually about Julie, not about Maria or Lily, but Julie. The only reason these stories are in the Sound of Music and Darling Lily categories are because they take place on the set of the movie. And honestly, that Sound of Music one was real, or at least the setup for it was real. So obviously, for Sound of Music, the characters are Maria and the captain, who were real people who really existed. But this specific story focuses on Julie and Christopher. Not the real life people who are the characters in the story, but the real life actors. And although I remember the story being kind of sweet, the fact that it's about Julie and Christopher rather than Maria and Georg is just not really my thing. I know there are people out there who do real person fic, as it's called, but I don't. But then do I? I actually kind of decided to make this video after seeing a post on my Hamilton fan Facebook group. It was talking about lambs, and we'll get into that in a bit. And a lot of people were commenting saying they thought it was wrong to ship real people, even fictionalized versions of real people. And that is obviously a very valid point. But if you have any investment in any relationship, be it real people or not, aren't you on some level shipping those characters? Obviously shipping can be wildly different from person to person. There are obviously the fanfiction writers and the fan artists who actively ship certain characters, but I honestly think if you've got any investment in a relationship, you are on some level shipping. So getting back to where all of this started, with Hamilton and Sound of Music, you can probably guess I don't have any problems shipping real people. I say real people in air quotes because I really mean fictionalized versions of real people. I wouldn't have really said I outright ship these people, but I guess by my own definition I probably passively do. I know when I was reading Maria's memoir I had just as much investment in their relationship as I did in the fictional one with the same people in Sound of Music. So I guess in a way I do passively ship the real life people. And yes, that is a bit, yeah. So I can definitely see where people come from. But that stems from shipping the fictionalized versions, and those versions are the ones I really actively ship. I'll ship Sound of Music's Maria and Georg, but not so much these people. And I'll ship Hamilton's Alexander and Eliza, but not so much these people. Though by my own definition I've worked myself into a corner, I guess. So now let's take a bit of a detour and talk about lambs. Just before we go any further, I should let you know I hate ship names. I really don't like ship names. Ship names are the amalgamation of the two characters' names smushed into one word. I can't say it with complete certainty, but I think one of, if not the biggest ship out there, is probably Drarry from Harry Potter, which is Draco and Harry. So they smushed their names together and we get Drarry. I think a big reason why I don't really like ship names is because of Sound of Music. As I have mentioned before, the vast majority of the Sound of Music fandom, or at least the part of the Sound of Music fandom that writes fanfiction, are middle-aged housewives. And between there only being one real ship in the fandom and the demographic, yeah, ship names were never really a thing. Which is good because I can't think of an amalgamation of Maria and Georg's names that doesn't make me want to gag. But now that I've mentioned Hamilton and ship names, it's time to talk about Lambs. Lambs is probably the biggest ship in the Hamilton fandom, and it is the relationship between John Laurens and Alexander Hamilton. Lambs. And the reason I want to talk about it is not just because it's the biggest, but because my feelings on Lambs are complicated. And I think I can put Lambs' popularity down to 3 reasons. Number 1. Slash ships seem to just be huge. As I mentioned, I would say Drarry is the biggest active ship in, well, the fan world. And that is between Draco and Harry. People seem to really, really love the gay ships. You look at a YA book that has a character that writes fanfiction, and it is, the majority of the time, the big gay ship between the main character and usually their mortal enemy. Again, Drarry. So that's the first reason. Reason number 2. It might have actually really been a thing. There are speculations and theories and evidence that, when looked at a certain way, could indicate that Laurens and Alexander were actually lovers. I'll just read a bit in Alexander Hamilton's Guide to Life where it talks about it. Hamil fans, if you don't think you're ready for Chernow's book, read this one. There was a deep fondness of friendship which approached the tenderness of feminine attachment, notes Hamilton's son. His grandson picked up on the same vibe, sensing a note of romance in their friendship quite unusual even in those days. And then there's this opening sentence to one of the letters he wrote to Laurens. Cold in my professions, warm in friendships, I wish, my dear Laurens, that it might be in my power, by action rather than words, to convince you that I love you. And reason number 3. The vast majority of Hamilton fans visualise the characters as portrayed by the original Broadway cast. And Anthony Ramos is absolutely gorgeous. So those are the reasons I think Lambs is as big as it is. And my relationship with it is complicated. You're not going to find me writing fanfiction about Laurens and Hamilton. I don't think I'll ever pair him with anyone but Eliza. But I have no problem reading it. You also won't find me looking at fan art like this, but I love the ones where it's kind of humorous or unrequited and things like that. Like the ones where Laurens seems just as dissatisfied as Angelica about Alexander getting married, or he's lined up next to the girls in Loving Alexander. And then there's my personal favourite. Even before I saw this image, my thoughts when I watched the Grammy performances at this point were always gaze longingly into Laurens's eyes. Just you wait! It looks a lot more intense when it's freeze-framed. And so that ends my little side talk on Lambs. But with things like Sound of Music and Hamilton in particular, fanfiction gets another level of interesting. In the wake of the musical's popularity, there have been plenty of novels that have been published about Hamilton and crew. And yet the stories I write about these characters are fanfiction when these aren't. Because these aren't specifically musical based, does that mean these are shipping the real people? Also, Hamil fans, you should all read those books. Alex and Eliza can be quite polarising, so if you don't like it, you should still try the others, I think. I guess the Von Trapps never got these sort of books because, compared to Hamilton, they're kind of modern. And probably also because it all started from a memoir, whereas Alex didn't end up writing one of those. And well, I guess that's the delicate and possibly controversial section of this video done, because now I'm going to talk about some things that I learned from fanfiction. Things I learned about these people from reading fictionalized stories, rather than some credible non-fiction source. And the absolute biggest example of that is the captain's first wife in The Sound of Music. She is mentioned like 4 times, I think, in the movie, and never by name. She's just mentioned as his wife or their mother. And yet, every person who writes Sound of Music fanfiction, heck, every person who reads Sound of Music fanfiction knows that her name is Agatha Whitehead, that she's British, and that she died from scarlet fever. And probably that her grandfather invented the torpedo. We learn absolutely nothing about her from the movie itself, but she's such a big part of the story, particularly where Georg's concerned, that everybody knows everything about her. Pretty much all the things I know about Sound of Music I have heard so many times that I don't even remember where I first heard them. And this is the case with Agatha. But I'm 99.9% sure that I learnt about her from fanfiction more than anywhere else. Given how small she is in the movie and how big she is in fanfiction, and the fact that I didn't dive really in depth into the background and lives of these people until after I started reading fanfiction, I think I probably learned almost everything I know about her from fanfic. Another moment I heard in fanfiction before I read it in Maria's final memoir is the moment that she decided she wanted to become a nun. She was hiking with some friends and she looked out and she saw a glacier, and she was suddenly overcome by the beauty of the world that God had made, that she decided that very second she was going to shut herself up in a convent. The specifics of Maria's religion and conversion and deciding to become a nun are probably best suited for a new video altogether, because it is actually quite an interesting story. But the story about the glacier specifically, I read in a fanfiction. In the author's note on the fanfiction, it said that it was mentioned in Maria's memoir, but I hadn't read Maria's memoir when I read this story. There are possibly more, but they're the only 2 ones I can think of for Sound of Music off the top of my head. Hamilton I have read much less fanfiction. The fandom's definitely less personal. With the Sound of Music fanfiction, we had a little group of those of us who wrote fanfiction for it, and we swapped stories and talked about it all with each other. But instead of just being one little group of us, it was made up of the most dedicated Sound of Music fanfiction writers, and I think it would have been also the majority of people who wrote Sound of Music fanfiction altogether. Hamilton's a lot bigger. I haven't read too much Hamilton fanfic, but I have read a lot of Hamilton biographies and novels and that kind of thing. So most of what I've learned from those. But there is one thing I distinctly remember learning first from a fanfic. There was one point in the Revolutionary War where Hamilton and a whole bunch of other troops crossed the Hudson River and were trying to fend off the British. They were trying to delay their arrival, but the British came anyway, and long story short, Alex ended up falling in the river. But when Alexander didn't appear after it was all over, everybody assumed he was dead. Now, obviously you know that he wasn't, but they all thought he was. So they were all acting like he was dead, and then he turned up the next day sopping wet. I read that for the first time in a fanfic. That was the first time I heard that story, and initially I didn't even know it was real, because in the story the characters are 13 years old. The squad are teenagers. The story is called Children of the Revolution, and it and its sequel are some of the funniest stories I have ever read. I'll leave a link in the down below. So that's the big Hamilton history thing that I first learned from fanfic. And honestly, that's everything for today. As I said at the beginning of this video, I know this could have been considered a kind of controversial and delicate topic to be talking about, so I hope I did it well enough. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this whole thing. How do you feel about people shipping characters who really existed, even if they're fictionalized versions of people who really existed? Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my video next week. So long, farewell!